No discussion of art history would be complete without mention of the art of ancient Greece. Classical Greek art and architecture has left its mark throughout the ages and across the world. Greek art is usually categorized under three headings: the Archaic period, the Classical period, and the Hellenistic period. Some experts also add another heading, the Geometric period, which preceded Archaic style. To understand how Classical Greek style evolved and what made Greek art so impressive, it's helpful to know what was happening in Greece culturally and politically. The golden age of art in Greece was the same era when the great philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle began teaching, and also when Greek dramaticists and playwrights like Sophocles and Aristophanes first showcased their theater. The Law of Draco, published in 621 BC, was the first step towards the world's first democratic government in Athens. The defeat of the Persians in 479 BC left a long-standing mark on the Greek society and civilization. With Athens gaining domination of Greece in every way, it's not surprising that Athenian influence is plain to see in art. Around 450 BC, Athenian general Pericles began an advertising campaign of sorts to win the favor of the populace. He commissioned several temples and buildings in Athens, all on a magnificent scale, hoping that this would drum up tourism to the city and make him and the Athenian way of life more popular than ever. As part of Pericles' campaign, he commissioned the Parthenon, which housed the legendary Athena Parthenis, a statue said to be made of gold and ivory. Other prime examples of classical Greek art and sculpture were created in the Parthenon as well. The birth of Athena and a battle between Poseidon and Athena were both prominent sculptures here, which were probably painted with bright colors, although no trace of the paint remains today in the ruins of the Parthenon. In the early geometric period, ceramic vessels were primarily used as funerary items. Repetitive geometric shapes and stick figures were common features on these vessels. Later, pottery became more utilitarian and decorative. During the Archaic period, vase painting was an important art form, which involved scratching incisions to reveal black silhouette designs and backgrounds of orange clay. Details were then painted in red or white. This early Greek potter's technique was known as the black figure technique, as the goal was to scratch out a clay background to reveal black characters. Around 530 BC, a new technique called red figure painting replaced chisels with paintbrushes. Instead of scratching the pottery to reveal figures in a background, a black background was painted on with brushes. This may sound like a simple process, but ancient Greeks actually used a three-step complex firing process that took into account oxygen levels and chemical reactions to seal the correct color scheme. During the Classical period, the creation and decoration of Greek pottery, a significant Greek art form, dramatically changed. The scenes shown on Greek pottery are like a window to the past. They include pictures of Greek mythology, everyday life, and 5th century comedians who wore grotesque masks and even padding to exaggerate body parts. These artists took pride in their work, as some ancient Greek pottery is signed. The Classical period was also the time when some of the most impressive bronze sculptures were made. These early sculptors could not quite master the technique of making their pieces appear natural. However, over time, they developed a keen eye for proportion. During the Classical period, artists broke away from the tradition of sculpting glorified renditions of ideal men and women, and began sculpting more realistically. This paved the road for even more realistic sculptures to come in Roman art. And it is strikingly evident when you look at their beautiful recreations of the human form. Expressive faces adorned these sculptures for the first time in the Classical period. The Aphrodite of Cnidos was one of the most innovative and influential sculptures and popularized the contrapposto pose. The contrapposto stance puts most of the figure's weight on one leg, turning the torso slightly, making subjects seem both dynamic and relaxed. Michelangelo's famous sculpture David would incorporate the contrapposto stance years later during the Renaissance. Greek artists of the classical period innovated architectural structure as well. Corinthian columns, more decorative than Doric and Ionic columns, were popularized in architecture and spread natural motifs around Greece. Friezes carved in relief were also incorporated into temple design. Frieze sculptures featured mythological and historical scenes, and sometimes animals. The Parthenon's frieze includes illustrations of gods, musicians, soldiers, weavers, elders, heroes, and other scenes. The sculpture of the Parthenon heavily influenced art in the 5th century BC and continues to influence art today. During the last period of ancient Greek art, the Hellenistic age, unflattering features were incorporated into sculpture, though they retained their idealized proportions and symmetry. Hellenistic art was increasingly used for propaganda purposes. It was at this time when two of the most famous Greek sculptures in history came to be, the Venus de Milo and Winged Victory of Samothrace. The Venus de Milo, now missing arms, exemplifies the Greek idealized style. And the Winged Victory of Samothrace shows the goddess Nike in a dynamic pose about to take off in flight. Although decades of battles eventually took their toll on the city, and Athens lost its sheen as a political capital, its artistic supremacy remained unshaken until 4th century BC. Greek artists developed new techniques and styles despite the constant threat of war. This was the time when Greek artists traveled long distances in the name of work, and art as a career gained recognition. As a consequence, formal education in art also came to be recognized, and several art schools were established, including the Sicyon School in Peloponnesus. During the 4th century BC, Athens was well on its way to decline, but the influence of Greek art had not yet begun to wane. Classical Greek art proved its endurance beyond doubt, influencing neighboring cultures substantially enough to bring about subtle changes in their indigenous styles and forms. King Philip of Macedon's successor, Alexander the Great, began his reign in the year 356. Alexander's patronage for the arts spread the classical style far and wide. Greek art set the foundation for many modern art practices, from our representation of the human figure to the techniques used in pottery and painting. More importantly, its societal emphasis on the arts remains influential.